Matt, and welcome along to the ACRE Conversation Series for rural communities that are imagining a new future.
Great to be here, Marianne.
So today I'd like to have a chat with you about the concept of community asset ownership. It's an area that people are showing an increasing level of interest in, and we're getting lots of queries about it. So I'd like to unpack it a bit today. Can you firstly explain for me, what do you mean by community asset ownership?
So community asset ownership is where a community sets about retaining a local service or a product that it cares about. It usually buys a building or buys a business, and then it operates itself for broader community benefit.
Can you share some examples then of rural communities, maybe in Australia or overseas, who've used community asset ownership as an approach?
Yeah, so there's a really well-known local example here in the northeast of Victoria. So it's Yackandandah, who 20 years ago discovered that their petrol station had gone out of business. And so they needed to build a brand new petrol station, and they utilised the community's resources to get the money in to build that business, to build the asset, and then to operate it for community value. So the community became shareholders, and a percentage of profits went back to the local community and good causes. And so in doing so, it's a really great example of community asset ownership.
So it sounds like in the case of Yackandandah, it was the potential closure of that petrol station that motivated people to get involved. What other reasons or drivers might there be for a community even looking at community asset ownership?
Yeah, there's a number of key motivations. One is the retention or creation of local employment, particularly people locked out of the kind of mainstream employment market, or increasingly in small rural communities, there's just no jobs. The second is the retention of a local product or service that the community care about. The third one is generally there's a redundant asset, some amazing old building or factory site that is currently underutilised. And the fourth one is to seize a new opportunity, a market opportunity, or something that people say, hey, there's a real opportunity that we could be seizing ourselves instead of someone else coming in to do it for us.
So the Australian Centre for Rural Entrepreneurship has lived experience in this space. Can you share a bit with me about your role and the role that ACRE has played in community asset ownership?
Yeah, so we've been supporting other communities buy and retain their local assets and create new businesses, all of that kind of stuff. And the sort of role we've played there, broadly fits within three categories. So it's knowledge of what the models are that help these sorts of structures happen. It's know-how, so one of the mechanics of how these things can happen, who needs to be around the table, how do you bring capital in? And the other one is networks. So how do you build those people at a community level that bring credibility to the approaches you're wanting to take, and also execution?
There's also the other component, which is the actual lived experience of leading a community buyback. Can you share a bit about the story of Old Beechworth Jail?
Yeah, so in 2016, ACRE led the buyback of the Old Beechworth Jail that was sitting here in the end of the main street in this little town called Beechworth. And this site is an 8-acre site. It's nationally significant for its connection to Ned Kelly and the whole Kelly saga. And we set about trying to convince the locals that it could be repurposed, and it could be repurposed around a cultural tourism opportunity, and as something that really sits well with what the site represents, but also the opportunity of bicycle tourism across our region and activating the space for a whole range and an eclectic range really of businesses sharing the workspace here. So in order to do that, we convinced 19 local families to combine their resources to invest in the site itself, and then we also got support from philanthropic trusts and foundations in the form of patient finance, or in this case it was patient loans, and together we're able to secure the site and then start activating. So we've been through this kind of process of what they call bootstrapping or proving a concept, and that's been just getting people who believe in the idea to come and join in on being part of the site. And we're now at that stage where the opportunities on a range of fronts is really quite significant, and we're about to go to the next stage of our master planning as well as our capital raise.
So that's a great description of the journey. What were some of the tricky points?
So there's really one thing that's critical for community asset ownership is that there needs to be a future purpose for whatever that, or a future customer, so that there is a business model around whatever the product or service is. So unless you can convince your community to become the customers like they did at the Yakandanda, that petrol station was not viable. But if you have your community members not only become shareholders and customers, all of a sudden that business is viable again. And so often it's about how we need to invest, but also know that there's going to be a new future customer, or amongst ourselves there's going to be enough customers to make it viable. In a site like the old Beechworth Jail, it was critical that we had that local engagement with the site, particularly tenancies and things like that for regular income, but also critical over time that we brought in the visitor dollar, because on its own the locals couldn't sustain a project of this scale. So we need to build a business case that has something in it for both.
So you've clearly outlined, I guess, the role of community in terms of driving a process of this kind and some of the benefits. I'm just curious, what's the role of government in community asset ownership?
So this is something that's quite new for government. So if you go to government and say, hey, I want to buy the local business for community benefit, they'll go, I'll go and see the community development people. And they kind of won't know how to help. And they say, oh, well, we want to buy this business. We'll go and see the economic development people. And they go, well, it's not quite our role to help you buy it. We can support you with industry support and some of those other things. So at the moment, it kind of falls between the cracks. But what's really important for government to do is have an open mind to the fact that these things are happening more and more right across the world. And so for them, it's about helping convene the sorts of people you might need in the room to take this stuff seriously, to actually be part of that sort of de-risking that's needed at the front end. So access to early stage seed grants is a wonderful one. Helping convene other people that might not know each other but could play a key role is another great role. So it's really being open-minded and seeking support about, okay, what do you want us to do next? So not doing things to and for the project, but to be there to be a supportive resource. Given that government has lots and lots of connections into state and federal and other departments, there is enormous opportunity for government supports of these projects in the future.
So there's a clear opportunity for government there in terms of connecting and providing access and so on. What about, I guess, the elephant in the room, which is often access to capital? Where do you see the private sector or philanthropy sitting in that space?
Yeah, so firstly, I would say that unless your group is willing to invest their own cold hard cash and their own investment into a project, I don't think philanthropy or government or corporates really need to be there. Because if you're talking about community asset ownership, community needs to be committed. And the best way to see that commitment exists is when people not only put their time in, but they're putting their own money in. And when that happens, then there's a really clear role for corporates, say, in supporting contracts that could be made available to that business to get their first contract to be trading. For government, it could be that there's support around the licences and planning required to get this off the ground, and potential support for going for grants and that kind of stuff. And definitely for philanthropy, it's about bringing that sort of operational capital in, but giving it the patience it needs to drive the new customers, because that takes a long time. The further you are away from the city, the longer it takes to build that sort of customer momentum in a business. So that's where philanthropy can really, really de-risk this, particularly for government.
So it sounds like there's enormous, I guess, potential and there's a range of opportunities for community asset ownership, and there are some lived examples both in rural Australia and certainly beyond. What role can ACRE play if there is a community interested in going on this journey?
Yeah, good question. So there are sort of 4 or 5 different things that need to come together and that communities need to have really thought about. You know, one is their governance structure. Like, how does this kind of make sense? Is it a commercial business? Is it a registered charity? Or how does the business model work in that relationship? There's governance around the group and who's going to be the leaders of this. There is strategy in terms of, okay, well, what is the main game? What is our clear purpose for why we're doing this? And do we have a clear trading activity? Because if we don't, we're going to need to find one. And then there's that idea of, well, who else can be around the table that can help coach and mentor you? You know, that idea of incubators and accelerators, so that you're not having to blindly sort of navigate this thing where there are people out there who've done this multiple times sometimes. And then there's that idea of the impact, how you're going to measure the impact, what your implementation plan looks like, and the sort of capital you need to bring in as you go on the journey. And finally, it is, what is the broader community's role? You know, sometimes it's just a small group that needs to start out and build something that's becomes proven because communities are a bit sceptical about whether it will work or not. Other times you need the customer, the community member needs to be the customer, so you need to engage them on day one. So it's just kind of not overplaying and not underplaying, not over-governing, not under-governing, not needing everyone to be on the same page, but having a number of people that have the capacity and leadership ability to be at the table. It's that sort of fine balance of what we call knowledge, networks and know-how.
So the knowledge, networks and know-how sounds pretty broad and quite deep in lots of ways. Is that something that ACRE does for free?
No, Marianne, we're actually a social enterprise ourselves, and activating the old Beechworth jail amongst other things, right across Australia. And so, we do have a fee for service in relation to our ability to do this, not just for a few communities, but hopefully hundreds of communities over the years.
Well, thanks for your time today. And if people want to get some more information, they can get in touch with ACRE for a discussion. Thank you.
Many thanks.